Hey, thanks for that introduction, Admiral Rogie, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and most of all to this year's graduates. Really, I guess the best ever. Really. You'd expect me to say it, but I really am truly honored to join you on what is a significant day in your careers. And I want to begin, as Admiral Rogie did, by recognizing some specific groups. First, the International Fellows and the U.S. Civil Servants who are graduating today. You represent 64 countries and 50 agencies across the U.S. government, as well as the private sector. My experience tells me that you'll go back to your countries and your organizations and assume positions of increased responsibility. And I also know that you've had a lot to do with the educational experience, the quality of the educational experience here at the National Defense University. And many of you are represented by your ambassadors here in Washington, D.C. And I have to tell you, I am very glad to see out here so many international students, so many representatives of the interagency, so many members of the private sector, because I think that's how we are going to operate together. That's how we fight together. And the fact that that's how we learn together is incredibly powerful to me. I also want to reinforce Admiral Rogie's thanks to the family members who are with us, and particularly the spouses. It's not lost on me that many of the graduates that are here this morning could have chosen to retire and move on to other endeavors. Instead, they chose to continue to enhance their professional career, and by doing so, committed to obligated service. They couldn't have done that without you, and I just want you to know that your support is recognized and appreciated. And for those that are graduating, I'd ask you to just help me to, for a moment, recognize the family members that are here in the role that they play, not just in the year that we're here at National Defense University, but the role that they play in the decision that we make to continue to serve. So family members, if you'd stand up, and if the class of 2019 would have one of those spontaneous applauses. Thanks. And also I want to recognize the faculty and staff from the 5 colleges that are represented here today. It's their collective efforts that really make the educational experience here at the National Defense University truly world class. And so one more time, one of those class of 2019 spontaneous applauses that Admiral Rogie referred to. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm mindful that commencement ceremonies are not about long speeches. And I know that most of you, and Admiral Rogie alluded to this, most of you are in a hurry to get to your next duty station. Some of you, I'll talk about that more in a minute. Some of you have movers coming this afternoon, others of you are in a hotel, and the more impatient among you are the ones that have your engines running in a parking lot, and I'm starting to get a little bit overwhelmed by the fumes standing up here, but you're in a hurry to go. How many of you are coming to the Joint Staff? Yeah, you should be in a hurry because we have the welcome aboard at 1700 this evening. It's all about taking care of people, right? But you'll be back. But anyway, I won't go on long. But as you prepare for the challenges of your next assignment, and more importantly, the years ahead, I want to leave you with a few thoughts about adapting and leading change in the profession of arms. Leading change is something I've grappled with, and particularly in the latter half of my career, and you're going to face that challenge in an incredibly dynamic strategic environment. Some of you may recall that when I came here last year, I spoke about Henry Kissinger, and I said that Henry Kissinger said this is the most complex and dynamic security environment since World War II. I think his point has been reinforced by events that have taken place during this past academic year. Just consider the developments in Venezuela, in the Middle East, to include yesterday's attack in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the 1 o'clock phone call I received this morning about the 2 tankers that were hit in the Gulf of Oman, along the India-Pakistan border in the Sea of Azov, and that uncertainty in global markets of the bilateral trade tensions between the United States and China is added to those events. And then, of course, the continued challenges in the Korean Peninsula, in South Asia, and across Africa. You're going to lead change in that context, and the situation is unlikely to become less complicated on your watch. You're also going to lead in an era with an unprecedented pace of change in our profession and in a character war. And I thought about the challenges that you'll face quite a bit last week as I attended the events in France commemorating what Admiral Rogie spoke about a minute ago, the 75th anniversary to landing at Normandy. And the ceremony is appropriately focused on the extraordinary heroism of the troops that crossed the beach on the 6th of June, 1944, and the bold leadership of leaders like Eisenhower, Bradley, and Montgomery. But during the trip, as I opened a few books and refreshed my memory on World War II, I also reflected on senior leader decision-making throughout the war, in the evolution of tactics, operational concepts, and equipment. And I was reminded of the extraordinary human cost of conflict in World War II and throughout the 20th century. And all that highlighted a point I made 3 years ago to the graduating class of 2016, now the second best class that's ever graduated from National Defense University. But in the wars of the last century, there are many examples of leaders who were slow to adapt and failed to recognize what were, at the time, fundamental changes in the character of war. There's much to be learned from their experience. In World War I, leaders failed to grasp the significance of changes that, in retrospect, were clearly evident in the Russo-Japanese War more than a decade earlier. New weapons and capabilities were fielded on the eve of World War I, but tactical and doctrinal development lagged, and the price for that delay was high. 10 million in uniform killed during World War I, a figure that is absolutely unfathomable to us today. To some extent, you can say the same about World War II. For example, the German Blitzkrieg reflected an appreciation for the potential of armor supported by close air. But the dominant thinking amongst Western armies at the time continued to be that the tank was merely an infantry support weapon. Men like J.F.C. Fuller and Liddell Hart had trouble getting traction with their new ideas. And there's many other examples of brilliant people with big ideas that were ignored during their time. Frankly, as I look back at the changes that took place during the 19th and the 20th century, most of the changes in our profession took place in the wake of failure. You might think all that's history and that we're more adaptive today, but we shouldn't be too complacent. A number of years ago, I read an article. In the article, the author highlighted the threat posed by homemade bombs to our ground tactical vehicles. He even pointed to a promising solution that had been devised by the South Africans to deal with what we now know as the improvised explosive device. The problem is he wrote that in 1996, and we didn't accept the value of his thinking until 2006, and as many of you know personally, not before we paid a very high price in casualties and defected and impact on our effectiveness, operational effectiveness. You probably have in your own experience many other examples that would indicate that we shouldn't be complacent. The price of responding slowly in the 20th century and our recent conflicts was high, but in the past, we had the opportunity to recover if we got it wrong. And that was certainly true in World War II. On 6 June 1944, we launched a combined naval, air, and land assault that remains the largest operation ever undertaken. It turned the tide in the European theater, and it's really remembered today as one of the great moments in military history. But the invasion of Normandy came 3 years after our near failure in North Africa, and we had time to adapt and change. Think about it. 3 years to evolve our doctrine. 3 years to expand our industrial capacity. 3 years to build an army. 3 years to develop leaders. And 3 years to develop the interoperability and capabilities that would allow us to be successful on the battlefield. In future conflicts, we're unlikely to have the same opportunity to recover. And again, I say that because the pace of change has greatly accelerated. Let me use what's happened in my 42 years of active duty to illustrate that point. You know, when I was a lieutenant, I remember using the same cold weather gear my dad had used in Korea 27 years earlier. And I don't mean the same kind of gear. I mean, we went to the warehouse and we pulled out the same jackets, the same gloves, the same boots that had been issued to Marines in 1950. And the radios that we used were uncovered PRC-25s from Vietnam with a 3 to 5 mile range in flat terrain. The trucks and the Jeeps would have been familiar to veterans from World War II, and frankly, so would the tactics. I have no doubt that a lieutenant who participated in the landing at Normandy would have been very comfortable in a formation with me as a platoon commander in 1977. That's how little changed between World War II and my commissioning as a lieutenant. But today there are very few things that have not changed since I was a lieutenant. In fact, time and space, communications, fires, and equipment at the company level, they've all changed significantly just since 9/11. And similar changes obviously can be seen across the joint force at the operational and strategic level, as well as at the tactical level. Today's trans-regional all-domain challenges are profoundly different than yesterday's regional conflicts focused on the sea, air, and land domains. And around the corner, we're going to be confronted by further challenges driven by developments in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, hypersonics, space-based capabilities, not to mention the developments that we can't even imagine yet. When I look at all this, my conclusion is that tomorrow there'll be no substitute for leadership that encourages critical thinking. There'll be no substitute for leaders that recognize the implications of new ideas, new approaches, and new technologies. And there'll be no substitute for leaders that take action to effect change. So my first point to you this morning is very simple. It's don't leave your intellectual curiosity and openness to new ideas behind when you leave the National Defense University. Don't be complacent. As leaders, create a culture within your units that encourages innovation and fosters that climate that questions conventional wisdom and encourages creativity. And one other thing I would tell you is don't assume you have all the answers. I like to tell people that, I go back to 1977. My confidence in my abilities in 1977 and my confidence that I had all the answers was way up here. And my experience was way down here. And I'm standing before you today, some 42 years later, and my confidence that I have all the answers is way down here. And arguably my experience is way up here. Leave the National Defense University with a degree of humility. Bring that to your new commands and be willing to recognize that all the right answers and all the good answers aren't necessarily the ones that come from you. I'd like to shift gears for a minute and just close by talking about a very important aspect of our business that hasn't changed, and that's the fundamental nature of war as a human endeavor. For all the talk of advancements in technology, war remains, as you all know, a clash of wills in an environment characterized by chaos, fog, and friction. And because the fundamental nature of war hasn't changed, neither have the primary factors that lead to success on a modern battlefield. Aside from the ability to adapt over the past 18 years, I think any tactical successes we've had in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan have been because of the endurance, the courage, and the commitment of individual soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and civil servants, both from the United States and our coalition partners. It's been their willingness to go out day after day to do what had to be done that made a difference. And as you all know, that will to fight, that will to put yourself at risk, that willingness to put the needs of your buddy ahead of your own, it can't be quantified, and it comes from intangibles in the human spirit. Field Marshal Montgomery made that point in the spring of 1944, so think about the setting, some months before the landing at Normandy. And I'll paraphrase Montgomery when he said, "The key to success in battle is not merely to provide tanks, guns, and other equipment. Of course, we want good tanks and good guns, but what really matters is the soldier inside the tank and the soldier alongside the gun. It's the man that counts and not only the machine. The best tank in the world is useless unless the crew inside is well trained and have stout hearts." My point is that we do need to adapt to change, but at the end of the day, we're not going to be defined solely by hypersonics, artificial intelligence, fifth-generation aircraft, space, or cyber capabilities. We'll need all that to be successful for sure, but the foundation of our success will continue to be men and women who embody our core values, men and women with the will and the courage to endure and prevail, and leaders with the ability to inspire excellence and an unrelenting desire to win. So today, as you drive out the gate of Fort McNair with your diploma in hand, be smart enough and bold enough to recognize the changes that have to be made for us to succeed on future battlefields, even as you foster that environment that breeds the intangible qualities that made a difference at Normandy and most assuredly are going to make a difference tomorrow. Class of 2019, thanks once again for the opportunity to join you here today, but more importantly, thanks for the leadership that you'll provide to our men and women across the force and across our allies and partners around the world. I have concerns about the current security environment. I have concerns about our ability to adapt and innovate to ensure we maintain a competitive advantage in the future. But the greatest reason why I have confidence in our ability to overcome those challenges, the greatest reason why I believe we'll be able to work through the security environment I briefly described a few minutes ago, and the reason why I believe we'll have the intellectual capacity, the energy, and the leadership to make the changes we need to effect to be successful on future battlefields is just looking around the room at the men and women in this room who have the commitment to go forward and effect the leadership necessary to do all of that. So God bless you all, and I wish you all the best.